Commander Zexith's three hearts beat in perfect synchronization as he stood before the massive holographic display in the war chamber of the Imperial Dreadnought Times. Inevitable victory asterisk. The blue-white glow illuminated his scaled features, casting sharp shadows across the assembled military council. 12 species were represented around the circular table. Each one a conquered race, now serving the Valkorian Empire with unwavering loyalty. The human problem has escalated beyond acceptable parameters, Zexith announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally overseen the subjugation of 47 star systems. Captain Marcus Chen continues to operate in direct violation of Imperial decree, and his influence spreads like a plague across the Outer Rim territories. Admiral Korthak, a massive crystalline being whose body reflected the chamber's lighting in prismatic patterns, shifted forward. Commander, with respect, one human cannot pose a significant threat to the Empire. Our forces number in the trillions. Our fleets span galaxies. Surely we are overreacting to what amounts to pest control. A ripple of agreement passed through several council members. The Grelthari representative, a slug-like creature with multiple eye stalks, bubbled in what passed for laughter among his species. The humans were barely capable of interstellar flight when we first encountered them. Their entire species fits on a handful of worlds. How dangerous can one individual be? Zexith's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary pair remained fixed on the tactical display. Dangerous enough that 3 separate battle groups have failed to capture or eliminate him. Dangerous enough that 17 Imperial supply convoys have been destroyed in the past month alone. Dangerous enough that entire planetary populations are beginning to whisper his name in their native tongues. Despite our linguistic suppression protocols, the chamber fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Zexith manipulated the holo display with practiced movements, zooming in on a star cluster in what humans called the Orion Arm. Red markers indicated recent attacks, each one precisely executed and strategically devastating. Marcus Chen, Zexith continued, was a simple cargo hauler before the Empire arrived in human space. No military training according to our records, no significant education, just another insignificant member of an insignificant species. Yet, in the 18 months since the subjugation of Terra, he has cost us more resources than the entire Kronos Rebellion. Admiral Korthak's crystalline form chimed softly, the sound indicating curiosity. What makes this particular human so resilient? 1. Loaded. 1. Zexith paused, calling up Chen's file from the Imperial database. A 3-dimensional image materialized above the table. A man of average height, with graying hair and weathered features, wearing a simple brown jacket. Nothing about his appearance suggested the galaxy-shaking threat he had become. Intelligence suggests he lost his family during the initial bombardment of New Shanghai Colony, Zexith explained, his voice taking on a clinical tone. Wife, 2 children, and his parents all killed in what was classified as acceptable collateral damage during mining rights enforcement. After that, Marcus Chen simply disappeared. And then, prompted Counselor Vexhai, a mantid-like creature whose compound eyes reflected multiple images of Chen's holographic form. Then the attacks began. Small at first, a disabled patrol ship here, a sabotaged supply depot there. We assumed it was random insurgent activity, nothing more organized than the typical post-subjugation unrest. But the pattern became clear within months. Every strike was precisely calculated for maximum disruption with minimal resources. Chen had somehow acquired an outdated human military vessel, a decommissioned destroyer called the Times Retribution Asterisk, and was using it to wage a one-man war against the entire Valkorian Empire. Admiral Korthak's form shifted, projecting skepticism through changes in his crystalline lattice. One ship against our forces? Impossible. Our scouts would have detected and eliminated such a threat immediately. You would think so, Zexith agreed grimly. But humans, we have discovered, possess certain unexpected qualities. Chen's vessel appears and disappears like a ghost. He strikes our supply lines, disrupts our communication networks, and has even managed to liberate 3 mining colonies without suffering a single casualty. More disturbing, he seems to know our tactical doctrines better than our own commanders. The Grelthari representative's eye stalks swiveled nervously. How is that possible? Human intelligence is limited compared to most civilized species. Limited, yes. But apparently, quite adaptable. Zexith brought up another display, showing tactical analyses from various engagement sites. Chen has studied our attack patterns, learned our weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. He fights nothing like the standard human military forces we conquered. Where they relied on brute force and overwhelming firepower, Chen uses stealth, misdirection, and an intimate understanding of our psychological profiles. Counselor Vex High clicked her mandibles together in what her species considered deep thought. Has he attempted to contact other human resistance cells? Coordinate a larger rebellion? Quote, no. That's perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire situation. Zexith's image of Chen rotated slowly above the table. Marcus Chen operates entirely alone. No crew, no allies, no support network. Just one human, one ship, and apparently unlimited determination. Our psychologists believe he doesn't actually expect to win. He's not fighting to liberate his species or restore human independence. He's fighting because he has nothing left to lose and nowhere else to direct his grief. The weight of that statement settled over the council like a heavy blanket. Species across the galaxy understood grief. But the idea of channeling it into such focused, sustained warfare was alien to most civilized minds. Grief can be powerful, Admiral Korthak acknowledged, but it cannot sustain indefinitely. Surely he will eventually exhaust himself or make a fatal mistake. Zexith's secondary eyes focused on the Admiral while his primary pair remained on the display. That was our assumption 18 months ago. It was our assumption 12 months ago, when he destroyed an entire fuel depot at Kepler Station. It was our assumption 6 months ago when he somehow infiltrated Fortress Grimhold and freed 2,000 human slaves without triggering a single alarm. We are no longer making that assumption. The chamber's lighting dimmed automatically as the ship's chronometer indicated the shift to night cycle. But none of the council members moved to leave. The implications of Chen's sustained campaign were beginning to sink in across species lines. What are you proposing, Commander? Counselor Vex High asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Full mobilization. I want a fleet of 50 dreadnoughts assigned to hunt down and eliminate Marcus Chen. No more treating him as a minor insurgent. No more assuming he will eventually give up or make a mistake. We end this threat permanently before it inspires others to follow his example. Admiral Korthak's crystalline form brightened with what might have been excitement or alarm. 50 dreadnoughts? Commander, that's enough firepower to reduce an entire star system to debris. Surely you're not suggesting we need that level of force against one human? I'm suggesting we use whatever level of force is necessary to ensure this problem disappears forever. Zexith's voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. The Empire's reputation depends on swift, decisive action. If word spreads that a single human can wage war against us for 18 months without consequence, how long before other species begin to question our strength? The Grelthari representative's eye stalks drooped in what his species considered deep concern. But the cost? 50 dreadnoughts represent a significant portion of our reserve fleet. What if other threats emerge while these ships are hunting one human? Then we will deal with those threats as they arise. But right now, Marcus Chen represents an existential challenge to imperial authority. Every day he remains free. Every successful attack he carries out sends a message to every conquered world that resistance is possible. That message is unacceptable. Quote, Zexith manipulated the holodisplay once more, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with red zones indicating areas where Chen had been active. The pattern was disturbing. He wasn't just hitting random targets, but systematically targeting the Empire's most crucial infrastructure points. "Look at this pattern," Zexith said, highlighting the connections between attack sites. "He's not just lashing out randomly. Chen is deliberately targeting our fuel production, our communication relays, and our troop transport routes. It's as if he has access to our strategic planning databases." "Impossible," Admiral Korthak declared. "Human technology couldn't penetrate our security systems." "Perhaps not, but human intuition apparently can predict our actions with remarkable accuracy." Zexith closed the tactical display and faced the Council directly. "I have authorization from the Imperial High Command to proceed with this operation. The question is not whether we will hunt down Marcus Chen, but how quickly we can bring sufficient force to bear." Counselor Vexhi's compound eyes shifted to focus on different aspects of the room simultaneously, a sign of intense consideration among her species. "What if he runs? When he detects our fleet movements?" Humans are known for their survival instincts. For the first time since the meeting began, Zexith allowed himself a predatory smile. "That's the interesting thing about Marcus Chen. According to our behavioral analysis, he won't run. He's had multiple opportunities to flee beyond the Empire's reach, to disappear into unexplored space, and live out his days in peace. Instead, he keeps coming back. He keeps attacking. He keeps making us look weak. Why?" the Grelthari representative asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Because he wants us to hunt him. Because somewhere in his grief-addled human mind, Marcus Chen has decided that the best way to honor his dead family is to force the Valkorian Empire to waste tremendous resources killing him. He's not trying to win this war. He's trying to make victory cost us everything." The implications of that statement rippled through the council chamber like a seismic shock. An enemy who didn't care about winning was far more dangerous than one who did, because all conventional strategic calculations became meaningless. "Then we give him what he wants," Admiral Korthak said finally. "We hunt him down and eliminate the threat once and for all." "Precisely," Zexith agreed. "But we do it right. Overwhelming force, perfect coordination, and no possibility of escape. Marcus Chen has had his run. Now he faces the full might of the Valkorian Empire." As the council members filed out to prepare for the largest manhunt in galactic history, none of them noticed the small listening device attached to the chamber's ventilation grate. None of them saw it detach itself and float silently toward the nearest communications array. And none of them suspected that Marcus Chen had been waiting 18 months for exactly this moment for the Empire to commit everything to destroying him. The hunt was about to begin, but the question of who was really hunting whom remained to be answered. The Times, Retribution Times, drifted silently through the asteroid field of the Zirion system, her hull scarred by 18 months of continuous warfare. From the outside, she looked like a derelict power signature, minimal, no active weapon systems, drifting with the natural rotation of the space rocks around her. To any Imperial sensor operator, she would appear to be nothing more than another piece of space debris in a system littered with the remnants of ancient battles. Inside the cramped command center, Marcus Chen sat in the captain's chair that had once belonged to Commander Sarah Walsh of the Earth Defense Force. The chair was too small for his frame, and the control interfaces had been jury-rigged so many times that half the original components were held in place with industrial tape and desperate engineering. But the ship still flew, still fought, and that was all Marcus needed. He studied the tactical display with the focused attention of a man who had learned that a single moment of inattention meant death. 50 Imperial dreadnoughts were moving into position around the outer rim of human space, their formation precise and overwhelming. Each ship was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Combined, they represented more destructive capability than most star systems had ever seen. "They're really bringing everything, aren't they?" Marcus said to himself, his voice barely above a whisper, in the empty command center. He had been talking to himself for months now, finding that the sound of a human voice, even his own, helped keep the isolation from driving him completely insane. The display updated as new intelligence flooded in from the network of listening devices and sensor pods Marcus had scattered throughout Imperial space over the past year. Each device was smaller than a coffee cup and nearly impossible to detect. But together, they formed an intelligence network that would have impressed the old Earth Defense Force's Strategic Command. Fleet Admiral Zexith himself, Marcus noted, highlighting the command ship at the center of the Imperial formation. They must really be tired of playing games with me. He leaned back in the commander's chair and closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to remember Sarah's last words before the Times. Retribution Times was decommissioned. She's old, Marcus, but she's got heart. Treat her right, and she'll bring you home safe. Sarah had been wrong about that last part, of course. There was no home to return to anymore. New Shanghai was a crater of radioactive glass, and everyone Marcus had ever cared about was buried beneath tons of melted stone and twisted metal. But the old destroyer had kept him alive long enough to become something the Valkorian Empire was apparently afraid of, and that was enough. The tactical display chimed softly, indicating new movement from the Imperial fleet. Marcus opened his eyes and studied the formation changes with professional interest. The dreadnoughts were spreading out in a classic encirclement pattern, designed to trap him in a sphere of overlapping fire zones with no possibility of escape. Textbook maneuver, Marcus murmured, calling up his analysis of Valkorian tactical doctrine on a secondary screen. Overwhelming force, perfect coordination, no chance of survival. They really did pay attention during officer training, but as Marcus studied the formation more closely, he began to smile. It wasn't a pleasant expression. 18 months of grief and warfare had burned away most of his capacity for genuine happiness. But there was a cold satisfaction in recognizing that his enemies were about to make exactly the mistake he had been hoping for. The Imperial fleet was positioning itself to attack the asteroid field where Marcus currently hid, but their formation was designed for open space combat against conventional forces. The tight coordination that made them so effective against normal enemies would become a liability in the chaotic environment of the asteroid belt, where sensor shadows and gravitational anomalies could disrupt even the most advanced targeting systems. More importantly, they were thinking like an empire. They expected their enemy to behave like a rational military commander, trying to preserve his forces and achieve strategic objectives. They couldn't conceive of an opponent who genuinely didn't care whether he survived the encounter. Marcus began powering up the Times Retribution's time systems, bringing her from standby mode to full combat readiness. The process was almost silent. One of the modifications he had made during the long months of guerrilla warfare was installing sound dampening throughout the ship. In space combat, noise didn't matter. But Marcus had learned that the psychological effect of operating in complete silence helped him maintain the focus necessary for survival. The ship's artificial intelligence, such as it was, came online with a series of soft chimes. The AI was old and basic compared to Imperial standards, but it had learned to work with Marcus over the months of constant modification and repair. He had even given it a name, Sarah, in memory of Commander Walsh. "Good morning, Sarah," Marcus said as he ran through the pre-combat checklist. All systems operational, the AI responded in its flat, synthetic voice. Weapons charged, engines ready, stealth systems active. Long-range sensors detect 51 Imperial vessels approaching our position. 51? Marcus frowned, calling up the sensor data on his display. "I count 50 dreadnoughts and... What's that?" The additional contact was smaller than the dreadnoughts, but still massive by human standards. As Marcus analyzed its signature, he felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It was a void render, an Imperial superweapon designed specifically for eliminating heavily fortified positions by creating artificial black holes. "They're really not taking any chances," Marcus said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and dark humor. 50 dreadnoughts and a planet killer. I should be flattered. The void render changed everything. Marcus had been planning to use the asteroid field's natural cover to pick off individual ships while avoiding direct confrontation with the main fleet. But the superweapon could simply delete entire sections of the asteroid belt from existence, eliminating his cover and leaving him exposed to the full firepower of 50 dreadnoughts. New plan, then, Marcus said, beginning to plot a course through the densest part of the asteroid field. If they want to play with superweapons, we'll show them why that's a bad idea. The Times Retribution Times began moving deeper into the asteroid belt, her stealth systems masking her heat signature and electromagnetic emissions. Marcus piloted the ship manually, weaving between massive chunks of rock with the precision that came from 18 months of constant practice. Every twist and turn was calculated to keep the ship in the sensor shadow of the asteroids while gradually working toward his actual target. Behind them, the Imperial fleet was beginning its final approach. The dreadnoughts moved in perfect formation, their massive hulls gleaming with the polish of military precision. Between them, the Void Render charged its primary weapon, a process that would take several minutes, but would result in the complete destruction of everything within a 50-kilometer radius. Marcus reached the position he had been seeking, a cluster of asteroids, rich in heavy metals that would provide excellent cover while giving him clear firing lanes to his primary target. He brought the Times Retribution Times to a complete stop, nestled in the shadow of a rock the size of a city block, and began the delicate process of preparing for what would likely be his final battle. Sarah, transfer all available power to weapons and engines. Shut down life support, artificial gravity, everything non-essential. Warning, the AI responded. This configuration will provide breathable atmosphere for approximately 47 minutes. More than enough, Marcus said, sealing his environment suit. Target acquisition on the Void Render. I want firing solutions for every weapon system we have. The tactical display updated as Sarah calculated firing angles and trajectories. The Void Render was positioned at the center of the Imperial formation, protected by layers of dreadnoughts and defensive screens. Getting close enough to damage it would require penetrating the most concentrated firepower in the known galaxy. Probability of mission success: less than 1%. Sarah reported with characteristic directness. Good odds, Marcus replied, checking his weapon systems one final time. I've beaten worse. The Imperial fleet reached the edge of the asteroid field and began its attack. Particle beams lanced through space, vaporizing chunks of rock and turning the ancient battlefield into a storm of superheated plasma. The dreadnoughts advanced in formation, their point defense systems automatically targeting anything that moved. But Marcus didn't move. He waited, counting seconds as the Imperial fleet drew closer to his hiding spot. The Void Render was charging its primary weapon, and in less than 3 minutes, it would fire, obliterating everything within range and ending Marcus Chen's war once and for all. 2 minutes. Marcus powered up the Times Retribution's Times engines, but kept her locked in position. The ship trembled with barely contained energy, like a predator preparing to strike. 1 minute. Imperial sensors swept over the asteroid cluster where Marcus hid, but the stealth modifications and natural cover kept the Times Retribution Times hidden. The Void Render's weapon reached 90% charge. 30 seconds. Marcus placed his hands on the flight controls and took a deep breath. Somewhere in his mind, he could hear his daughter's laugh, his wife's voice, his parents' stories about the old days before the Empire. They were gone, but their memory would serve as fuel for what came next. 10 seconds. The Void Render's weapon reached full charge. Energy readings spiked across every sensor in the Imperial fleet. In moments, the artificial black hole would form and consume everything within range. Marcus smiled that cold, humorless smile and whispered, "Run." The Times Retribution Times exploded from her hiding place like a missile fired from the darkness. Marcus pushed the engines far beyond their safety limits, sending the old destroyer hurtling toward the center of the Imperial formation at velocities that should have torn the ship apart. Behind him, the asteroid he had been hiding behind vaporized under concentrated fire from a dozen dreadnoughts. But Marcus was no longer there. The Times Retribution Times twisted and spun through the deadly maze of particle beams and plasma bolts, her hull glowing from near misses as Marcus pushed both ship and pilot beyond all reasonable limits. Imperial gunners tried to track the small, fast-moving target, but their weapons were designed for capital ship engagements, not dogfighting with a single destroyer. The Void Render loomed ahead, its weapon fully charged and ready to fire. At this range, the artificial black hole would consume everything within 50 kilometers, including Marcus and every Imperial ship in the immediate vicinity, which was exactly what Marcus was counting on. He armed every warhead the time's retribution times carried and set them for proximity detonation. If the Void Render fired now, the explosion would create a cascade effect that would destroy half the Imperial fleet, along with Marcus himself. It was a perfect example of human tactical thinking. If you can't win, make sure victory costs your enemy everything they have. Admiral Korthak's voice crackled across the Imperial command frequency. Void Render. Abort firing sequence. Repeat. Abort firing sequence. Immediately. But it was too late. Marcus had timed his attack perfectly, reaching point-blank range just as the superweapon's firing sequence became irreversible. The artificial black hole began to form, its gravitational field reaching out to grab everything within range, including the time's retribution times and her cargo of nuclear warheads, now armed and ready to detonate at the worst possible moment for the Valkorian Empire. The artificial black hole collapsed into existence with the fury of a dying star, its gravitational field reaching out to embrace everything within its lethal radius. For a single, frozen moment, time seemed suspended as 51 of the Empire's most powerful warships realized they were caught in the grip of forces beyond their control. Marcus Chen's final transmission cut through the electromagnetic chaos like a knife. For New Shanghai. For everyone you took from me. For everyone you'll never hurt again. For New Shanghai. For New Shanghai. For New Shanghai. For New Shanghai. The time's retribution times vanished into the black hole's event horizon, taking her cargo of armed nuclear warheads with her. But the gravitational anomaly had been artificially created and lacked the mass to sustain itself naturally. As it began to collapse, the warheads detonated in a chain reaction that turned the dying black hole into something far worse, a quantum cascade that ripped through space-time itself. Admiral Korthak watched in horror from the bridge of the times. Inevitable victory times, as 12 of his dreadnoughts were torn apart by gravitational forces that fluctuated wildly between crushing density and explosive expansion. The Void Render, caught at the epicenter of the cascade, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, but deleted from reality, as if it had never been built. All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace, Korthak commanded, but his orders came too late for many of his vessels. The quantum cascade was expanding, creating space-time distortions that made faster-than-light travel impossible, within a radius of several light minutes. The Time's enduring conquest, Asterisk, a dreadnought that had personally overseen the subjugation of 7 star systems, found herself caught between colliding gravity waves. Her shields collapsed, her hull buckled, and her crew of 12,000 beings died as the ship was compressed into a sphere less than a meter in diameter. Commander Zexith, observing from what he had believed was a safe distance, felt his 3 hearts skip in perfect synchronization as he realized the scope of the disaster. "Get me a count," he ordered his tactical officer. "How many ships have we lost?" 17 dreadnoughts confirmed destroyed, came the reply, the officer's voice shaking with disbelief. 8 more, showing critical damage. "The Void Render is gone, sir. Completely gone." 17 dreadnoughts. Each one had carried a crew of thousands, represented years of construction time, and cost more resources than most star systems produced in a decade. In a single, suicidal attack, Marcus Chen had eliminated more Imperial firepower than the Kronos Rebellion had managed in 3 years of organized warfare. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from across the sector. Word of the battle is spreading faster than our ability to contain it." Zexith closed his primary eyes in frustration. This was exactly what he had hoped to prevent the transformation of Marcus Chen from a simple insurgent into something approaching a legend. But legends were powerful forces in a galaxy filled with oppressed peoples, and legends had a way of inspiring others to acts of desperate courage. The first signs of that inspiration came within hours. On the mining world of Kepler-7, human workers looked up from their forced labor to see the news broadcasts that somehow managed to penetrate Imperial censorship protocols. A single man had faced down 51 Imperial warships and had taken 17 of them with him. The impossible had become possible. And suddenly, the Empire seemed less invincible. The work slowdown began that same day. Not an organized strike or coordinated rebellion. Just thousands of individual decisions by people who had been told that resistance was futile. Production dropped by 15% in the first week, 25% in the second. Imperial overseers increased security and punishment details, but they couldn't force broken spirits to mend themselves. On the orbital station above Proxima Centauri, Chief Engineer Rebecca Santos stared at the tactical reports that had been smuggled through the station's communication array. She had known Marcus Chen before the war. They had worked on the same freight routes, shared drinks at the same spacer bars, complained about the same administrative hassles that made civilian cargo hauling such a frustrating profession. Marcus had been nobody special, just another working-class pilot trying to make enough credits to support his family. The fact that nobody special could inflict such devastating losses on the Empire changed everything. Rebecca thought she knew about the balance of power in the galaxy. She began to study the station's technical specifications with new eyes, looking for vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The Empire had built Proxima Station to control the flow of resources through the Centauri system, but every system had weaknesses if you knew where to look. And Rebecca Santos knew exactly where to look. 3 weeks after the Battle of Zarian, Proxima Station suffered what appeared to be a catastrophic reactor failure. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away and eliminated the Empire's primary refueling depot for the entire Outer Rim sector. Imperial investigators found no evidence of sabotage, just a series of coincidental equipment failures that had cascaded into total system collapse. Rebecca Santos was listed among the casualties, but her body was never recovered from the wreckage. The pattern spread across human space like a virus. Cargo ships developed mysterious engine problems that left them stranded in hyperspace. Their Imperial escorts forced to waste days on rescue operations. Communication relays suffered inexplicable power failures that isolated Imperial commanders from their superiors for crucial hours. Mining equipment broke down with suspicious frequency, always at the worst possible moment for production schedules. None of it was organized. There was no coordinated resistance movement, no secret communication network, no master plan. Just ordinary people making individual decisions to honor the memory of a man who had shown them that the Empire could bleed. But the most devastating effect of Marcus Chen's final battle wasn't measured in damaged infrastructure or delayed shipments. It was the change in how the Empire saw itself, and how its enemies saw it in return. Commander Zexith stood once again before the holographic display in his war chamber. But the assembled council looked very different than it had 3 weeks earlier. Several members had requested transfers to safer assignments after the Zirion disaster, and their replacements were younger, less experienced officers who had never faced a truly determined human enemy. The situation is deteriorating across multiple sectors, Zexith admitted, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion that came from weeks of emergency briefings and crisis management. The Chen incident has inspired copycat attacks from 17 different species across 43 star systems. What started as a manhunt for one human insurgent has become a galaxy-wide crisis of Imperial authority. Admiral Korthak, his crystalline form dimmed by stress and overwork, chimed mournfully. How was one human able to cause such widespread damage to our control systems? Our psychological warfare experts insisted that no individual could inspire this level of coordinated resistance. It wasn't coordinated, Zexith replied, highlighting dozens of incident reports on his tactical display. That's what makes it so dangerous. Marcus Chen didn't create a rebellion, he created an idea. The idea that ordinary beings can strike back against overwhelming odds and actually hurt their oppressors. Ideas are much harder to kill than insurgents. The newest member of the council, A young Valkorian officer named Vorthak leaned forward with the confidence of someone who had never seen his forces fail. Surely we can restore order through the standard methods. Increase security. Implement harsher punishments. Make examples of the troublemakers. Zexith's secondary eyes fixed on the young officer with a stare that had intimidated subordinates across half the galaxy. We tried that approach on Kepler 7. Work productivity dropped to 30% of normal levels. We tried it on the Altair shipyards. 6 freighters suffered accidental explosions in 1 week. We tried it at the Vega mining complex. The entire facility had to be evacuated after someone introduced a computer virus that turned the automated systems against the Imperial overseers. But these are just random acts of sabotage, Vorthak protested. Surely our security forces can handle individual troublemakers. Individual troublemakers, yes, but we're not facing individuals anymore. We're facing the ghost of Marcus Chen, and ghosts are remarkably difficult to arrest. Admiral Korthak's form brightened slightly as he processed a new thought. What if we attempted to discredit Chen's memory? Launch a propaganda campaign showing that his actions were ultimately futile, that his death accomplished nothing? Zexith manipulated the holo display to show casualty reports from the Battle of Zerion. 17 dreadnoughts destroyed, 8 more severely damaged, and a void render completely eliminated. The numbers spoke for themselves. Discredit a man who single-handedly destroyed a quarter of our battle fleet? Admiral, I suspect such propaganda would have the opposite of its intended effect. The young officer Vorthak shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then what do you suggest, Commander? Surely we cannot allow this situation to continue indefinitely. Zexith stared at the tactical display for a long moment, watching the red markers that indicated ongoing resistance activities spread across dozens of star systems. Each marker represented beings who had been inspired by Marcus Chen's example, who had decided that dying on their feet was preferable to living on their knees. I suggest we learn from our mistake, Zexith said finally. Marcus Chen tried to warn us, in his own way. Every attack he carried out, every convoy he destroyed, every installation he sabotaged was a message. He was telling us that humans don't surrender easily, that grief can be transformed into a weapon more powerful than any dreadnought. What kind of weapon? Admiral Korthak asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Hope, Zexith replied. Marcus Chen gave hope to every oppressed being in the galaxy. He showed them that the Empire can be hurt, that resistance is possible, that even the smallest actions can have enormous consequences. We can rebuild our lost ships. We can hire more security forces. We can implement harsher punishments. But we cannot take back the hope that Marcus Chen died to give to others. The war chamber fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines and the soft chiming of Admiral Korthak's crystalline form as he processed the implications of Zexith's words. Outside the chamber's viewport, stars wheeled slowly past each one, a potential flashpoint where the next Marcus Chen might be taking shape. Somewhere in the darkness between those stars, the Times, Retribution Times, was gone. Her crew of 1, finally at rest beside his family. But the idea that Marcus Chen had died to protect was spreading across the galaxy at the speed of light, carrying with it a simple message that no amount of Imperial firepower could silence. Even the Empire can be made to bleed, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.